look, I think you've got to take some geopolitical realities into account. And I also think people who argue what you're arguing or say we ought to be doing everything for Ukraine, put aside the Russian thing. If you seriously think, I don't, that Ukraine is going to be in a position to militarily regain Crimea, militarily regain the East, I don't. I'm not saying they should give up those claims, and ultimately they should be pursued diplomatically and perhaps through sanctions. But the idea that Ukraine is ever going to gain a degree of military advantage that would allow them to roll back Russian troops, given how the scale of the Russian military, the way the economy is put on a war footing, you're just kidding yourselves. And I think at some point, the real friends of Ukraine will speak honestly about how Ukraine needs to read how it needs to define victory. And there's got to be alternative definitions other than military liberation of what is rightfully theirs.
So I want to understand you clearly. You're saying that Ukraine should accept a significantly shrunken state, that it should somehow claim that as enough, sufficient to justify this war, and it should then trust Putin to stick to some sort of long-term ceasefire agreement, armistice agreement, and believe that Putin wouldn't then simply regroup and start planning his next military push, which may indeed take him right through Ukraine and push him right up against NATO's borders and threaten NATO members. Why would anybody believe Putin's word right now?
Stephen, you must be having a separate conversation than the one you're having with me. I did not say any of those things. I'm not talking about trusting Vladimir Putin. I am talking about you giving Ukraine all the means it needs for self-defense. It's basically controlled 80% of its territory now, ever since 2014. That seems to me totally reasonable. They can hold Putin off. It would teach Putin the lesson that time is not his friend.
Why do you say that long term they could hold Putin off if he comes back for more? Why do you believe that the Europeans or the Americans would give Ukraine the kinds of security guarantees that would allow it to prosper in its shrunken state? History doesn't suggest that anything you're positing as a stable future for Ukraine would be stable at all.
Look, we just flat out disagree. You keep calling it a shrunken state. I'm talking about a viable Ukraine in control of 80% of its territory with significant ties to the EU, security assurances from NATO, a massive military and economic support program. That would work just fine. And it'll take, though, the emergence of a post-Putin leadership in Russia, and that day will come. The pendulum will swing, and you'll have a Russian leader who will get tired of Russia being a pariah and a failed country. And that's the day when you will be able to have a negotiation, not simply for a ceasefire. I think that can be done pretty soon once the aid is restored to Ukraine, but for the return of Ukraine's territory in exchange for a more normal relationship between Russia, not just in Ukraine and Europe. We're not going to get that under Putin. The best we can get under Putin is to hold Russia off. Then after Putin, we can get the last 20% of Ukrainian territory.